Under the moon's unyielding gaze, flames whispered secrets to the shadows, promising both end and eternity. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant thunder. Arwin Solace stood bound to the ancient stone pillar, her wrists chafed raw by ropes woven from silver-threaded hemp, sacred bindings meant for offerings, not executions. At 34, her body bore the quiet strength of one who had outlived a mate's fever and the endless vigils of the lunar shrines. Her dark hair, streaked with silver like veins of moonlight in obsidian, whipped across her face, but she did not flinch. The air bit into her skin, colder than the heart of winter, as the gathered pack of the Ironclaw realm encircled the pyre. Their eyes gleamed with a mix of fervor and fear, alphas and betas alike, their breaths fogging the night like ghosts reluctant to depart. She had been the keeper once, guardian of the old rites under the swollen belly of the moon. In those shadowed alcoves of ice-carved temples, Arwin had traced the goddess's sigils with trembling fingers, invoking blessings for the marked and the lost. Her widowhood had deepened her devotion. Without a mate's claim, she had poured her Omega's quiet fire into the flames of the shrines, where embers danced like forgotten stars. But the realm had changed. King Thorn Blackwood, the Alpha whose iron rule spanned these frozen wilds, had decreed the old ways obsolete, superstitions that weakened the pack against rival clans encroaching from the southern thaws. Denounce them, he had commanded through his enforcers, or face the pyre as a heretic. Arwin had refused, not with defiance or pleas, but with silence. Her voice, when it came, was a murmur like falling snow. The moon does not bend to kings. They had dragged her from the temple that dawn, her simple woolen gown tearing on the thorns of the outer woods. Now, as Moonrise painted the sky in bruised purples and silvers, the high priest, once her ally, approached with the torch. His face was a mask of regret, etched deep by years of compromise. "For the unity of the pack," he intoned, his voice swallowed by the wind's mournful keen. The crowd shifted, a sea of fur-lined cloaks and armored shoulders, their murmurs rising like the weevo of wolves sensing blood. The pyre at her feet was a cruel architecture, logs of birch and elder anointed with oils that would burn hot and true, their resinous perfume already stinging her nostrils. Arwin's heart beat steady, not with terror, but with the rhythm of memory. She saw her late mate, Eirik, his broad hand cupping her cheek in the shrine's glow, whispering of the goddess's favor before the fever claimed him. She felt the cool marble under her palms from nights spent in prayer, the pulse of the earth revealing hidden paths through the snow, gifts of her Omega blood, subtle and scorned in a world that prized claw and fang. Rejection had come not as a sudden wound, but as a slow exile, whispers in the halls, tasks stripped away, until she stood alone, an Omega unbound by loyalty yet chained by faith. The priest lowered the torch. Flames licked the kindling with greedy tongues, crackling as they climbed. Heat bloomed against the cold, a false warmth that seared her bare ankles. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, veiling the moon like a shroud. Arwin did not scream. She did not pray aloud. Instead, she closed her eyes and remembered. The way the lunar light had once pooled in the shrine's basin, revealing visions of paths untrodden, of destinies woven in silver thread. Her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, had guided lost hunters home, mended rifts in the pack's fragile peace. But to the king, it was a relic of weakness, a whisper against his roar of command. The fire roared higher, devouring the lower logs with a hunger that mirrored the pack's own. Pain lanced her skin as embers spat and danced, the heat pressing in like an unwanted embrace. Through the haze, she heard the crowd's hush fracture into gasps, alphas gripping their weapons, omegas averting their eyes. The wind shifted, carrying a chill that defied the blaze, and Arwin opened her eyes. The flames, which should have consumed her, parted like curtains drawn by invisible hands. A figure emerged from the heart of the inferno, untouched by the ravenous glow. She was radiance incarnate, the moon goddess in form, both ethereal and fierce. Her gown flowed like liquid silver, catching the firelight in prismatic shards, and her eyes held the depth of endless night skies. No words passed her lips. She simply stepped forward, the flames bowing away as if in reverence. The air hummed with an otherworldly silence, broken only by the distant uivo of wolves on the ridge. The goddess moved to Arwin's side, her presence a cool balm against the scorching assault, standing in silent alignment. No defense, no proclamation, just the weight of her being, a testament etched in light and shadow. The realm froze in that moment. King Thorn, atop his obsidian throne carved into the mountainside, leaned forward, his scarred face paling beneath the fur of his cloak. His guilt, long buried under decrees of progress, stirred like a beast roused from slumber. Whispers rippled through the pack. The old rites. They live. Arwin met the goddess's gaze, and in that silver depth she saw not salvation, but revelation. Faith had never been lost. It had been forsaken by those who feared its quiet power. The flames flickered, uncertain now, as if awaiting a command from the divine. Arwin's bonds felt looser, the ropes singed but not severed, and the wind whispered promises of paths yet to unfold. In the goddess's shadow, the Omega who had been cast out felt the first stirrings of something ancient, a destiny that burned brighter than any pyre. The flames, once ravenous, now huddled like chastened wolves at the pyre's edge, their glow casting elongated shadows across the frost-kissed stone of the execution circle. Arwin Solace drew a breath that tasted of ash and pine, her skin prickling, not from the heat, but from the goddess's lingering chill, a breath of eternal winter that seeped into her bones. The silver-threaded ropes, singed at the edges yet unyielding, bit deeper into her wrists as she shifted, the pillar's rough granite grinding against her back like the realm's unspoken judgment. Around her, the Ironclaw pack stood transfixed, their armored forms rigid in the moon's pale wash, breaths held in a collective suspension. The wind sliced through the gathering, carrying the faint metallic tang of fear sweat from the alphas who had moments before bayed for her end. The goddess did not linger. With a grace that bent the air like rippling water, she dissolved into the night, her form unraveling into motes of silver that swirled upward, merging with the stars. No command echoed in her wake, no divine edict to shatter the silence. Yet the absence spoke volumes. The high priest dropped his torch, the wood clattering against the frozen earth, and stumbled back, his face ashen as if the moon itself had drained his color. Murmurs erupted then, fracturing the hush, whispers of omen and folly, of rites they had scorned, now clawing back from the void. King Thorn Blackwood rose from his obsidian throne, the scrape of stone on stone a low growl in the night. His silhouette loomed against the jagged peaks, broad shoulders draped in a cloak of raven fur. The weight of his crown, a circlet forged from moonstone and iron, pressing shadows into his brow. At 42, he was a fortress of a man, his frame scarred from border skirmishes and the endless grind of rule. But tonight, his eyes, storm-gray and haunted, betrayed the fracture beneath. Arwin met his gaze across the circle, unflinching. In that silver-threaded rope binding her, she felt the pull of her Pathfinder's gift stirring faintly, like a vein of ore glinting in torchlight. It had always been there, a subtle current in her Omega blood, the ability to sense hidden trails through snow-choked passes, to glimpse the weave of fates in the moon's reflection. But it was no weapon, no claw to rend foes. It was a whisper, a guide for the lost. And now, as the pack's eyes turned from her to their king, she saw the exile forming in their averted stares, the rejection not of death, but of erasure. They would not kill her, not with the goddess's shadow still fresh on the flames, but they would cast her out, as they had her mate's memory, As they had the shrine's quiet sanctity, Thorn descended the throne steps with deliberate slowness, his boots crunching the thin crust of snow that dusted the ground. The crowd parted like mist before a gale, betas and omegas alike lowering their heads in deference or dread. He stopped mere paces from the pyre, close enough for Arwin to catch the scent of him, leather and hearth smoke, undercut by the faint, coppery bite of old blood from wounds long healed. His face, chiseled by years of command, bore the mark of his guilt, a faint scar tracing his jaw, a remnant of the fever that had claimed her Eric and so many others under his reign's strained resources. "Keep her solace," he said, his voice a rumble like distant thunder rolling over the peaks, laced with a melancholy that surprised her. It was not the roar she had expected, but something tempered, as if the words carried the weight of unspoken regrets. "The fire has judged you innocent, but the realm's law bends to no miracle." She lifted her chin, the wind tugging at her gown's frayed hem, exposing calves blistered by the flame's aborted kiss. "Law or not, Your Majesty, the moon has spoken. Will you silence what the goddess has revealed?" Her words were steady, though her heart thrummed with the instinctive pull of his alpha presence, a magnetic force that tugged at her core, unbidden and unwelcome. Omegas felt it always, that ancient tether, but in him it resonated deeper, stirring echoes of paths untaken, of destinies that might entwine like roots beneath the frost. He reached out, his gauntleted hand hovering near the ropes, but did not touch them. Instead, his fingers brushed the air as if testing the ether for divine retribution. "The old rites weakened us," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his gaze drifting to the horizon where Uivos rose in mournful chorus, scouts signaling threats from the southern clans, ever pressing. "I banished them to forge strength, not shadows." Guilt flickered in his eyes, raw as an open wound, the melancholy of a king who had traded faith for survival, only to watch his pack fracture under the weight. Yet in that vulnerability, Arwin sensed the curse upon him, not sorcery, but the slow poison of isolation, his alpha's fire dimmed by the duty that demanded he stand alone. The priest approached then, bowing low. "Sire, the elders counsel Exile. Banish her to the outer wilds, beyond the Frostfang Vale. Let the goddess guard her there." Nods rippled through the crowd, a tide of relief masking deeper unease. Thorn's jaw tightened, the scar along it whitening, but he nodded once, sharp as a blade's edge. With a gesture, 2 betas cut the ropes, their knives whispering through the silver threads that fell away like shed skin. Arwin's arms fell numb to her sides. The sudden freedom, a vertigo of cold air and pounding blood. She stepped from the pyre unsteadied, the ashes crumbling beneath her feet, each step a declaration against the realm that had forsaken her. As they led her toward the mountain's edge, where the path descended into blinding white expanses, Thorn watched from afar, his form a dark sentinel against the moon. The wind howled louder, carrying flurries that stung like accusations, and in the distance the sacred fire's embers glowed, a symbol unextinguished, threading through her thoughts like silver veins. Exile was no death, but a rebirth into the unknown, where fear and curiosity warred within her. And in the king's shadowed gaze, she glimpsed the first thread of connection, instinctive and denied, pulling taut across the frozen divide. The betas halted at the tree line, shoving a fur cloak into her hands before turning back, their torches bobbing like fireflies into the night. Alone now, Arwin clutched the cloak, rough wolf pelt still warm from another's body, and faced the endless snowfields, the moon her only companion. Yet behind her, faint as a heartbeat, came the crunch of footsteps. Not pursuit, but something wounded, drawing near through the storm. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snowfields stretched like an endless shroud under the moon's indifferent eye, each step a surrender to the wind's relentless bite. Arwin Solace pulled the wolf-pelt cloak tighter around her shoulders, its coarse warmth a fragile barrier against the frost that clawed at her blistered skin. The path ahead vanished into swirling white, where jagged rocks lurked like the bones of forgotten giants, and the air hummed with the promise of deeper cold. Exile tasted of isolation, sharp as the metallic tang on her tongue from the pyre's smoke, yet in her veins stirred the Pathfinder's quiet pulse, a subtle map unfolding in her mind, tracing faint trails through the veil of storm. She had always sensed them, hidden crevices in the mountains, veins of warmth amid the ice, gifts scorned by a realm that favored brute force over subtle grace. The footsteps behind her grew distinct, no longer muffled by the gale, but deliberate, heavy with purpose. Arwin halted, her breath fogging the night, and turned slowly, the cloak's hem dragging furrows in the powder. From the tree line emerged a shadowed figure, broad and unyielding, his form cutting through the flurries like a blade through silk. King Thorn Blackwood. Not in regal array, but stripped to essentials, leather breeches scarred by old battles, a simple tunic beneath his raven cloak, and the moonstone circlet glinting faintly at his brow. No entourage flanked him. He moved alone, a fugitive in his own domain, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent an instinctive tremor through her omega core. Fear coiled first. The alpha who had decreed her banishment now pursued her into the wilds, but curiosity unfurled beside it, a fragile bloom in the frozen waste. "You should not be here," she said, her voice steady despite the wind's howl, carrying the weight of accusation and something unspoken, a pull she dared not name. He stopped a few paces away, close enough for her to see the frost rimming his beard, the faint steam of his breath mingling with hers. Up close, the scars on his face told tales of survival, the jawline mark from the fever's era when his choices had cost lives, including her mate's. Guilt etched deeper lines around his eyes, turning his melancholy into a palpable force, like the shadow of a storm cloud over the peaks. "Nor should you walk these passes unguarded," he replied, his rumble low, tempered by the night's chill. No command laced his words, only a raw edge of concern that surprised her. He glanced over his shoulder toward the distant glow of the execution circle, now swallowed by the ridge. The southern clans stir. Scouts reported their banners at the thaw line at dusk. If they learn of the event, they'll see weakness in our faith's fracture. His admission hung between them, a confession wrapped in strategy. The Ironclaw realm teetered on borders frayed by endless skirmishes, and the goddess's intervention painted Thorn not as iron ruler, but as the king who had invited divine rebuke. Arwin's heart quickened, not from the cold, but from the proximity of his presence, the alpha scent of hearth smoke and earth stirring her blood like embers under ash. She resisted it, rationalizing the draw as mere instinct, a survival echo in the face of exile. "And you follow to what end? To ensure my silence in the wilds?" She stepped back, boots sinking into the snow, the Pathfinder's gift whispering of a nearby cleft, a cave mouth veiled by drifts, a refuge if peril came. Thorn's gaze softened, the melancholy deepening as he shook his head. "To atone. The pyre was my decree, born of fear that the old ways would unravel us. But tonight I saw what I had forsaken." He extended a hand, gloved in worn leather, not to seize, but to offer. "The storm worsens. Take my lead, or we both perish before dawn." Before she could refuse, a distant uivo pierced the gale. Not the mournful pack call, but a feral snarl, multiplied by echoes off the rocks. Thorn's head snapped up, his body tensing like a bowstring drawn. "Rivals," he growled, the word laced with the weight of old wounds. Shadows flickered on the ridge above, silhouettes against the moon. Scouts from the southern clans, drawn by the unrest, their forms lean and predatory, cloaks billowing like raven wings. Arrows whistled through the air, one embedding in the snow mere feet away, its fletching quivering. Instinct surged. Arwin seized his arm, her fingers digging into the muscle beneath his cloak. The contact electric, a spark of empathy amid the chaos. "This way," she murmured, the Pathfinder's sight blooming vivid, a narrow path veering left into a crevice where wind carved sanctuary from stone. Thorn nodded, trust flickering in his eyes, and they ran, the snow yielding then clutching at their legs. His hand found her waist, steadying her over a hidden drop. The touch lingering a fraction too long, born of necessity, yet igniting something deeper. Bullets of ice pelted them as the pursuers closed, their shouts guttural, promising blood under the moon. They plunged into the cleft, a cavern yawning like the maw of some ancient beast, its walls glistening with frozen veins of quartz that caught the moonlight in prismatic shards. Thorn shoved a boulder across the entrance, sealing the gap with a grunt, his breath ragged. Inside, the air hung still, heavy with the mineral tang of deep earth, a faint drip echoing from unseen depths. Arwin leaned against the wall, chest heaving, the adrenaline ebbing to reveal the raw ache in her limbs. He turned to her, wiping snow from his face, and for the first time, she saw the wound, not visible but etched in his posture, the king broken by his own edicts, fleeing the throne that had become a cage. "You saved us," he said softly, sinking to one knee beside a cluster of dry tinder he drew from his pouch. His fingers, steady despite the tremor of cold, coaxed a spark from flint, flames blooming small and fierce, casting golden flickers across his scarred features. The fire's warmth seeped into the stone, chasing shadows, and Arwin felt it mirror the tentative thaw in her chest, empathy weaving through the fear, transforming denial into a fragile bond. She knelt opposite him, the wolf pelt pooling around her like spilled ink, and extended her hands to the blaze. "Not I alone. Your strength held the door." Their eyes met over the flames, the connection instinctive yet resisted, a current humming between them. In his gaze, she glimpsed the curse of his rule, the guilt that isolated him, turning duty into a solitary pyre. And in her own heart, curiosity bloomed into understanding, the Alpha not as tyrant, but as a soul marked by the same forsaken faith. Outside, the wind howled with the rivals' frustrated snarls, snow battering the seal like accusations unheeded. Within, the fire crackled, a shared vigil against the night, where words unspoken bridged the divide. Arwin traced a sigil in the air, the moon's light filtering through a crack to illuminate its silver, and Thorn watched, his melancholy easing into quiet wonder. Protection had forged their refuge, but in the shared silence, empathy stirred toward something irrevocable, a bond kindled in the heart of Exile. The fire's modest heart pulsed in the cavern's embrace, its flames weaving golden threads through the quartz veins that latticed the walls like frozen lightning. Arwin's solace sat cross-legged on the chilled stone, the wolf pelt cloak draped over her knees, its weight a grounding anchor against the night's unspooling chaos. The air inside held a damp stillness, laced with the earthy musk of deep rock and the faint resinous smoke from Thorn's tinder, scents that mingled with the Alpha's presence, stirring her senses into quiet unrest. Outside, the storm raged unabated, the rivals' howls twisting into the wind like frayed curses. But here, in this borrowed sanctuary, time bent slow, allowing the raw edges of survival to soften into introspection. Thorn fed the fire with splintered branches scavenged from his pouch, his movements deliberate, each crackle underscoring the silence between them. His storm-gray eyes, shadowed by the circlet's faint gleam, flicked to her now and then, not with the command of a king, but the guarded curiosity of one unmoored. The gilt that carved his features had deepened in the firelight, etching hollows beneath his cheekbones, a visible echo of the fever years when his edicts had prioritized borders over hearths, claiming lives like Eric's in their wake. Arwin felt it pull at her, that melancholy, not as pity, but as a mirror to her own scars, the quiet erosion of faith under rejection's weight. Yet the instinctive tether of their shared peril hummed beneath it all, a denied current she rationalized as mere omega reflex, nothing more. She traced idle patterns in the dust at her feet, her fingers lingering on the sigil she had drawn earlier, a crescent moon cradling a winding path, the emblem of her Pathfinder's gift. It had always been subtle, this inner compass, visions flickering at the edge of sleep, intuitions that revealed safe crossings through blizzards or hidden springs in barren tundras. In the shrines, it had served the pack, guiding lost souls back to the fold. But Exile had sharpened it, or perhaps the goddess's shadow had awakened what the realm had dulled. As the fire popped, sending sparks dancing like errant stars, a deeper pulse stirred within her, a vision unbidden, blooming vivid behind her closed lids. The cavern walls dissolved in her mind's eye, replaced by a silver-veined map unfurling across the frost fangs, paths snaking through ice-choked gorges, converging on a shadowed citadel where banners of the southern clans furled like storm clouds. At its heart loomed a figure, Thorn, not as he was now, but crowned in bloodied moonlight, his form rent by betrayal's claws. A rival alpha, face obscured by helm and fury, drove a blade toward his throat, while whispers of treachery echoed from Ironclaw's own ranks, elders swayed by promises of warmer thaws, faith bartered for alliance. The vision sharpened, the winding path illuminating a detour, a forgotten shrine nestled in a glacial crevice, its flames eternal, capable of rallying the forsaken rites to mend the realm's fracturing soul. And at the vision's core, her own hand extended not in supplication, but in revelation, the key to his survival, woven into the moon's ancient weave. Arwin's breath caught, her eyes snapping open to the cavern's dim reality. The fire had dimmed slightly, casting Thorn's profile in stark relief, his jaw set as he stared into the flames. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the chill, the vision's intensity leaving her trembling, as if the moon itself had poured its light through her veins. "What haunts you now?" he asked. His voice a low rumble that bridged the space between them, laced with that ethical restraint she had glimpsed earlier, the king's duty warring with a deeper, unspoken need. She hesitated, the words heavy on her tongue, rationalizing the urge to share as folly born of isolation. But the bond forged in flight tugged insistently, empathy blooming into trust amid the fire's glow. "A glimpse," she murmured, her voice threading the air like smoke. "The Pathfinder's sight. It shows more than trails through snow." Extending her hand toward the flames, she let the vision guide her, tracing its contours in the air with deliberate strokes. Silver light followed her fingers, faint but undeniable, coiling from her palm like mist under moonlight, a manifestation deeper than any shrine ritual, the goddess's touch lingering in her blood. Thorn leaned forward, his breath stilling as the ethereal lines took shape. The citadel, the encroaching blades, the treacherous whispers. His eyes widened, the melancholy fracturing into stark realization, the circlet at his brow catching the silver glow like a beacon. "This. You see my end?" The question hung raw, not accusatory, but laced with the weight of destiny's cruel poetry. A king confronting the curse of his isolation, the guilt that had blinded him to paths beyond iron and decree. "Not your end," Arwin replied, the light fading as her hand lowered, leaving the air humming with residual power. A crossroads. The southern clans march not just on borders, but on the heart of what we've lost. Your elders. Some whisper alliances that would drown the old rites entirely. The vision's truth settled between them, Visceral as the cavern's chill, her gift no longer a whisper, but a clarion call. She felt exposed, vulnerable in the revelation. Yet the act bound them tighter, her Omega's quiet strength unveiling his Alpha's shadowed fate. He rose slowly, pacing the confined space, his cloak whispering against the stone. The fire reflected in his eyes, mirroring the inner blaze of comprehension. She was no mere exile, but the thread in the moon's tapestry, the pathfinder whose sight could redeem what his rule had fractured. Guilt twisted his features anew, not for past decrees, but for the blindness that had nearly severed this connection. "I banished what I feared would weaken us," he confessed, stopping before her, his presence a wall of restrained power. "But your gift is the strength I sought in claws alone. Without it, the realm falls to shadows darker than this storm." Arwin met his gaze. The instinctive pull, now laced with purpose, resisted no longer, but accepted as destiny's quiet demand. The wind outside battered the boulder, Weavos rising in frantic chorus, but within, the revelation hung like a vow unspoken, her domo the key to his salvation, forging redemption from the embers of exile. Yet as the silver light fully ebbed, a deeper chill seeped from the cavern's depths. The vision's warning echoing, time wove thin, and choice loomed like the moon's unyielding rise. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment, Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your. The cavern's depths exhaled a breath of ancient frost, stirring the dying embers into faint, protesting glows that painted the quartz walls in fleeting amber. Arwin's solace felt the vision's silver residue linger in her palms like a phantom warmth, its revelations coiling through her thoughts as tightly as the wind clawed at the sealed entrance. The air grew heavier now, laced with the mineral bite of stone and the Alpha's restrained scent. Earth and smoke, a tether that pulled at her Omega instincts with insistent gravity. Thorn paced the narrow confines, his boots scraping echoes off the floor. Each step a manifestation of the turmoil she had unveiled. The citadel's shadow, the elders' whispered betrayals, the rival Alpha's blade glinting under a bloodied moon. Guilt had cracked his melancholy facade, revealing not the Iron King of decrees, but a man forged in the fever's unforgiving forge, where choices like hers had been sacrificed for the pack's survival. She rose, the wolf pelt cloak slipping from her shoulders to pool at her feet, exposing the blistered skin that still throbbed with the pyre's memory. Freedom from exile felt illusory here, in this womb of rock, where destiny pressed close as the cavern's walls. "We cannot linger," she said, her voice threading the chill like a needle through frost-laced cloth. The Pathfinder's gift hummed anew, not as a distant map, but an urgent pulse, revealing fractures in the stone above, a hidden vent leading upward, toward the ridge where the storm's fury masked greater perils. Her heart warred with itself. The instinctive bond with Thorn, once denied as mere reflex, now bloomed into a reluctant empathy, urging her to guide him from the abyss her vision had shown. Yet freedom whispered of paths untaken, of vanishing into the wilds where no king's shadow could reach. Thorn halted before her, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the breath from the air. The circlet at his brow caught a stray gleam from the embers, casting prismatic shards across his scarred jaw, the mark of his own past failures, a constant reminder of the fever that had claimed her Eric and hollowed the pack's hearths. "You owe me nothing, Arwin," he murmured, the words raw, stripped of command, laced instead with the ethical weight of a ruler who had bartered faith for fragile peace. "But if your sight is true, the realm bleeds from wounds I inflicted. The elders. I see it now, their counsel twisted by southern gold, promising thaws while they sell our rights to oblivion." His hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough for the heat of his skin to bridge the gap, a silent plea born of isolation's curse. The moral crux settled between them like fresh snow, forgiveness for the pyre's decree, or war against the betrayers who would drown the moon's light in blood. Arwin's chest tightened, the omega in her yearning to mend what rejection had shattered, yet the exile's fire urged liberty, to flee this pull, to reclaim the shrines in solitude. Before she could voice the dilemma, a low rumble shook the cavern, dust sifting from the ceiling like ash from a dying fire. The rivals' howls sharpened outside, no longer scattered but coordinated, joined by the guttural snarls of iron-claw betas, traitors answering a summons, their loyalty bartered in the night. Thorn's face hardened, the melancholy yielding to alpha resolve, though guilt flickered in his eyes like embers refusing extinction. "They come for us both," he growled, drawing a short blade from his boot, its edge catching the faint light in a silver arc. The high priest's regret was a mask. He leads them now, swayed by the rival's promises. Arwin nodded, the vision's threads aligning with the chaos, the confrontation unfolding not in the citadel, but here, in the wild's unforgiving heart. She pressed her palm to the wall. The Pathfinder's gift surging, a concealed passage yawning open with a groan of stone, revealing a narrow tunnel veined with ice that sloped toward the ridge's crest. "This way," she whispered, seizing his free hand, the contact visceral, sending a jolt through her veins that blurred the line between necessity and nascent desire. They plunged into the passage, the air turning razor-sharp, walls brushing their shoulders like the realm's closing jaws. Thorn's grip tightened, protective yet yielding, his body shielding hers as loose rocks clattered in their wake. The tunnel spat them onto a windswept ledge overlooking the snow-choked gorge, where the moon hung bloated and accusatory, illuminating the fray below. Torchlight bobbed in the drifts, a dozen figures converging. Southern clan warriors, their cloaks emblazoned with crimson fangs, flanked by iron-claw turncoats led by the high priest, his face twisted in zealous fervor. At their fore strode the rival Alpha, Lord Varric of the Thawbloods, a hulking shadow with eyes like molten iron, his axe gleaming with runes that mocked the old rites. "The king flees like a whelp," Varric bellowed, his voice booming over the gale, stirring uivos from his pack that chilled the blood more than the frost. Thorn stepped forward, blade raised, but Arwen's hand on his arm stayed him, her gift revealing the moral precipice. Strike now, and blood would seal the fracture, dooming the realm to endless war. Show mercy and risk the pack's scorn, yet perhaps reclaim the forsaken faith. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the scent of blood already, a fallen scout's, staining the snow red as spilled wine. "They were yours once," she said softly, her voice cutting through his tension, empathy weaving into the bond that now felt inevitable, resisted no longer but tested in fire. "The priest, he followed your decrees into doubt. Forgive, and the moon may yet bind what iron cannot." Varric's gaze lifted, spotting them, and arrows hissed through the night, embedding in the ledge's edge with splintering cracks. Thorn deflected one with his blade, the clang echoing like a judgment bell, but his eyes searched hers, the choice etching deeper lines into his guilt-ridden face. "Mercy or war," he echoed, the words a philosophical murmur amid the rising snarls, his ethical core clashing with the Alpha's instinct to rend. Arwin felt the pull of love's redemption, not as reward, but as proof, urging her toward him, her freedom entwined with his salvation. Below, the priest hesitated, torch trembling, a flicker of the old alliance in his eyes. The storm swelled, snow veiling the gorge in white fury, and Thorn lowered his blade a fraction, the decision hanging like the moon's unblinking stare. In that suspended breath, Arwin glimpsed the Renacimento seed, compassion as the true crown, forging unity from betrayal's ashes. Yet as Varric charged upward, axe raised in an arc of crimson promise, the dilemma sharpened to a blade's edge, forgiveness a gamble against the blood that hungered under the lunar gaze. Her heart pounded with the wind's rhythm, the Pathfinder's paths converging on this ledge, where choice would either heal or shatter the fractured soul of the realm. The wind's fury crested like a tidal wave of white, slamming into the ledge with a roar that drowned the rival's snarls, veiling the gorge in a blinding cascade of snow and ice. Arwin's solace braced against the onslaught, her fingers still entwined with thorns, the contact a lifeline amid the chaos, a union forged not in tenderness, but in the raw crucible of choice. Below, Lord Varric's charge faltered, his axe arm raised high, crimson runes pulsing like veins of fresh spilled blood under the moon's bloated gaze. The high priest hesitated at the fray's edge, torch sputtering in his grip, his face a fractured mask of zeal and regret, the old rite's echo warring with the betrayal Thorn's decrees had sown. Arrows sliced the air once more, one grazing Thorn's cloak with a whisper of torn wool, embedding in the stone inches from Arwin's boot. Thorn's blade trembled in his grasp, lowered but not sheathed, the ethical core of him, melancholy king, guilt-scarred alpha, clashing against the instinct to unleash the storm within. His storm-gray eyes met hers, searching the depths where her Pathfinder's gift had unveiled his unraveling fate. The citadel's fall, the Elder's whispers turning to daggers, the realm's heart bleeding out in a thaw of false alliances. Mercy, he breathed, the word a vow against the gale, his voice threading through her like silver veins in obsidian. Not surrender, but redemption's gamble, a choice to heal the fractures he had wrought, to crown compassion over claw. Arwin felt it resonate in her omega blood. The pull no longer resisted but embraced as proof. Love as the quiet fire that mends what iron shatters, her exile's rebirth entwined with his salvation. She nodded, the motion subtle, her free hand rising to trace a sigil in the swirling snow. The moon's crescent cradling a winding path, her gift manifesting in luminous arcs that cut through the storm like beacons. The light bloomed outward, not as weapon, but as revelation, illuminating the gorge in prismatic silver that halted the advance. Varric snarled, shielding his eyes, his pack faltering as the glow seeped into their ranks, stirring dormant echoes of the old rites in their veins. The high priest dropped to one knee, torch extinguished in the drift, his whispers fracturing into pleas. The goddess, she returns through the Forsaken. Betrayal's hold cracked, not by force, but by the moral light of forgiveness, a philosophical balm against the war's hunger, proving strength in mercy's unyielding grace. Thorn stepped forward, blade sheathed with deliberate slowness, his broad frame a sentinel against the ledge's brink. Enough, he commanded, his rumble carrying over the wind, laced with the melancholy of a ruler reborn. Varric, your thaws encroach on shadows we cast ourselves, but blood for blood chains us eternal. Join the rites we abandoned or retreat to your southern mists. The moon offers no third path. The rival alpha paused, axe lowering a fraction, his molten eyes flickering with calculation, the pack's weavos dying to uneasy murmurs. In that suspended breath, Arwin's vision shifted, the Pathfinder's pulse revealing the convergence, paths weaving not toward slaughter, but toward uneasy alliance, the shrine's eternal flames rallying the fractured souls under one lunar banner. Yet sacrifice loomed, inevitable as the frost's bite. Varric lunged then, not in full charge but a testing strike, his axe whistling toward Thorn's shoulder in a blur of crimson fury. Arwin moved without thought, shoving the king aside, the blade's edge grazing her arm in a hot line of pain that bloomed red against her skin, blood as the story's ink, sealing the choice in visceral testimony. Thorn roared, not in rage but anguish, catching her as she staggered, his arms encircling her waist with a desperation that blurred Exile's divide. The wound seared, copper flooding her mouth as she bit back a cry, but in his hold she felt the cure begin. His alpha presence a balm, staunching the flow with pressure from his cloak, empathy transforming to unbreakable bond. Varrock recoiled, the silver light coiling around his weapon like chains, forcing him back down the slope. The priest rose, scrambling upward with hands raised in supplication, tears carving tracks through the frost on his cheeks. "Sire, forgive this blindness. The goddess speaks through her." The turncoats followed, their snarls yielding to hesitant bows, the moral weight of Arwin's sacrifice tipping the scales, war averted not by decree, but by the Omega's quiet valor, her blood a libation on the snow. Thorn cradled her against his chest, the heat of him chasing the cold from her limbs, his guilt fracturing into fierce resolve. "You chose me," he whispered, lips brushing her temple, the words a confession of union's dawn. Love as redemption's proof, resisted no longer, but accepted in the fire of peril. The storm eased as if commanded, snow settling in gentle veils that blanketed the gorge, the moon's light softening to a benediction. Varrock retreated into the shadows, his pack dissolving into the night with grudging howls, the threat quelled but not erased, a fragile peace forged in the crucible of choice. Arwin leaned into Thorn, the pain ebbing to a dull throb, her gift humming with visions of the glacial shrine, flames awaiting to heal and bind, where the realm could renascer from rejection's ashes. His hand traced her wound, gentle as falling petals, sealing it with a murmured oath under the stars. In that embrace, Exile yielded to destiny, the Alpha and Omega entwined not as reward, but as the eternal weave, sacrifice yielding cure, union blooming from the blood and frost. Yet as they descended the ridge toward the waiting pack, the wind carried a final distant weevo, a reminder that rebirth demanded vigilance, the moon's gaze ever watchful over paths yet to unfold. Arwin's heart steadied in his rhythm, the silver sigil fading on her skin like a promise etched in light. The Renacimiento's flame kindled bright against the encroaching dark. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The descent from the ridge unfolded like a tapestry woven from frost and fleeting light, each step etching Arwin Solace's resolve deeper into the snow's unyielding embrace. Thorn's arm encircled her waist, a steady anchor against the lingering throb of her wound, the crimson stain on her skin now crusted like a sigil sealed in blood under the moon's watchful arc. The wind had relented to a whisper, carrying the faint, acrid scent of quenched torches from the gorge below, where the rivals' retreat left echoes of snarls fading into the night's vast hush. Arwin's heart synced with the rhythm of his breath, the Alpha's warmth seeping through her like hearthglow piercing eternal winter, a union not born of passion's haste, but of sacrifice's quiet forge, where her blood had bought the fragile truce. The pack awaited at the mountain's base, their forms huddled silhouettes against the execution circle's dying embers, fur cloaks dusted white as if the storm had cloaked them in penance. The high priest knelt foremost, his torch long discarded, hands clasped in supplication that trembled with the weight of reclaimed faith. Whispers rippled through the betas and omegas as Arwin and Thorn emerged from the tree line, the silver residue of her sigil still faintly luminous on her palm, a beacon that drew eyes like moths to lunar flame. Rejection's shadow lingered in their averted gazes, but the Pathfinder's revelation had cracked it open, revealing paths of rebirth where exile once loomed absolute. Thorn halted at the circle's edge, his grip on Arwin tightening not in possession, but in shared vulnerability, the melancholy king. Guilt no longer a solitary curse, but a bridge to her Omega's enduring grace. "The moon has judged," he declared, his voice a resonant timbre that cut the chill, carrying the ethical timbre of one who had chosen mercy over the blade's easy song. Varrock retreats, but his shadow lingers. We rebuild not with iron alone, but with the rites we forsook, the shrine's fire to bind what decrees divided. The pack stirred, Weavos rising tentative and harmonious, a chorus mending the fracture of betrayal. The priest rose, tears carving silver paths down his weathered cheeks, and bowed low before Arwin. "Keeper, your sight. It pierces the veil we blinded ourselves to. Forgive our haste." She stepped forward, the snow yielding softly beneath her boots. The wound on her arm, a visceral reminder of the cost. Blood as the ink of destiny's quill, scripting redemption from the pyre's aborted hunger. Empathy flooded her, not as weakness, but as the quiet power of her gift, the winding path within her veins now extending to encompass the realm's lost souls. "Forgiveness is no crown to wear lightly," she replied, her words measured, laced with the tragic poetry of one who had tasted exile's bite. "It demands we walk the moon's trails together, mending what the fever and the frost have torn." Her gaze met Thorn's, the instinctive bond solidified in that moment. Love as proof, not prize, a renascimento where her pathfinder's light illuminated his shadowed throne. The procession formed without command. Torches reignited to cast golden halos over the snow, guiding them toward the glacial shrine nestled in the Frostfang's hidden crevice. A sanctuary Arwen's vision had unveiled, its eternal flames a symbol unextinguished amid the ice. The path wound upward, steep and treacherous, flanked by pines bowed like sentinels under the moon's silver wash. Arwin walked at Thorn's side, their steps synchronized, the air thick with the resinous perfume of elder wood and the faint, metallic echo of her healing wound. Introspection wove through the ascent, memories of Irik's fevered end, the shrine's marble cool under her palms, now transmuted into purpose. What was strength, if not choosing compassion amid the storm's roar? The question lingered unspoken, a philosophical thread binding her heart to the Alpha's ethical core. As the crevice yawned open, the shrine revealed itself in breathtaking sanctity. Walls of translucent ice, veined with quartz, arching like the goddess's own vault, where a central basin cradled flames that burned without fuel, blue and profound, dancing in eternal vigil. The pack gathered at the threshold, breaths fogging the air, their eyes wide with awe as the fire's glow reflected in armored breastplates and furred hoods. Arwin approached the basin, her hand extended, the silver sigil on her palm igniting in resonance. The flames leaped higher, parting like the pyre's obedient curtains, and a soft hum filled the chamber. The moon's pulse, revealing hidden facets in the ice, sigils of old, paths to unity etched by divine hand. Thorn knelt beside her, his broad frame humbled, the circlet at his brow catching the blue fire in prismatic depths. "This is your domain," he murmured, his voice a rumble of surrender, guilt yielding to the cure of shared destiny. "I banished it, fearing its quiet would undo me. But you are the revelation I denied." His fingers brushed hers, intertwining over the basin, the contact electric yet tender, a union born of moral choice where sacrifice had paved the way. Arwin felt the Pathfinder's gift surge, visions blooming not of fracture, but of wholeness. The realm's borders secured not by war's blood, but by rights renewed, omegas and alphas entwined in the moon's weave. The pack echoed the moment with a collective sigh, the high priest intoning the old invocation, words flowing like melting snow into the basin. Flames curled upward, enveloping Arwin and Thorn in a cocoon of warmth that chased the frost from their bones, her wound sealing in a bloom of silver light, cure as the final sacrament, blood transfigured to light. In that embrace of fire and ice, Renascimento crystallized, rejection reborn as alliance, the Omega's exile the catalyst for the king's redemption. Love proved its mettle here, resisted in the wild's denial, rationalized in the cavern's hush, now accepted as the eternal flame, transcending hierarchies, mending the soul of the Ironclaw realm. As the flames subsided to a steady glow, the moon outside crested the peaks, bathing the shrine in unyielding silver. Arwin leaned into Thorn, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the sacred hush. The wind outside carried no more weavos of threat, only the distant harmony of wolves, acknowledging the night's profound shift. Destiny had revealed itself not as chain, but as path freely chosen, faith against despair, compassion over power, the goddesses' silent alignment echoing in their united hearts. The realm stood reborn, its fractures healed in the fire's quiet testimony, where every shadow held the promise of light. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.